Thanks for joining the Parable Podcast today. I'm your host, Danielle Zapchenk. Each week, we get a chance to listen to others and lean in a little bit to understand how we are transformed by God. Find out how God is working in others' lives, but also kind of recognize how He is working in our own. On today's episode, my guest briefly shares about a sexual trauma from her past. So if that is triggering to you, or maybe you have little ears in the room, I want you to skip ahead about 10 minutes into our conversation. Let's listen in with a conversation with Kelly Olson. Well, I am so excited to have Kelly Olson of the Baton Pass joining us today on the Parable Podcast. I recently kind of met you, Kelly. I was at a concert and you were the host and you are in charge of the Baton Pass. And so as I was listening to you talk, I was just so encouraged just how you were talking about your ministry. And it just really prompted me as I was thinking about this podcast. Like, it just really encouraged me. I'm like, okay, if she is doing this, if she felt led to do something, I know I can do this too. So I just appreciate your heart that night and just what you had to share. And I was thankful for the words that you had to say. So thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am born and raised here in the Chicagoland area. My big adventure was to University of Illinois for 3 years. I was a dork and took 21 credit hours and got out of there in 3 years. Since then, I married my high school sweetheart, and we've been married for 16 years. He's my best friend and the love of my life. We still have so much fun together. And we have two beautiful baby girls. My oldest is 7, and her name is Alexa. We call her Lexi, and she is just the cartwheel queen right now everywhere we go. She is doing cartwheels and just hanging from monkey bars and loving gymnastics, and I just love her love for life. And then we have Nora, who is 4, and Nora is named after my grandma Eleonora, but she goes by the nickname Chuck Nora because she jumps off of things and runs into things, and we always look over to her to see how she's doing and what her response is from whatever she just ran into, and her response is always, "I'm okay." She's just a tough little cookie, and we enjoy parenting them. We have just launched a business in Bloomingdale, Illinois, so that's been a lot of excitement. It's mostly my husband. I'm doing some of the marketing for it, and for the last 4 years, we have been also running the Baton Pass, so we have a lot of fun. Yeah.
Well, that's just so exciting. As we grow up, we kind of imagine what our lives look like, so it is cool to see, you have 2 girls, super distinct personalities, and starting a business and having this ministry. So that's amazing.
Thanks. Yeah.
What do you think that you're a natural at doing in your life?
I have to answer that I am a natural connector. That is just the way that my husband and I are wired, and we were before we were together, and now it's just supercharged. But anytime we run into somebody and there's a need, immediately in our mind, we're thinking of, oh, who can connect with them? And we get such a charge as well from connecting people, those divine connections where we know that they needed each other, but there was just no connection made yet. And to get to see the fruit of those relationships is something that is really fun for us.
When I think about Jesus, he was that natural connector with people, that he went to all the different places. He was with all the different people, and he was just relational and understanding and caring. And that's a beautiful mindset of how you live your life, and that gift that's naturally already in you. Well, if you look back on a certain season or a period of your life, what has really stood out to you is you can look back on that and say, this is exactly what God taught me through that season.
So the story that definitely sticks out for me is when I was a sophomore in college, and I was living the college life and having fun and taking my 21 credit hours and just really filling my life with busyness so that I didn't have to handle the pain and the wounds that were lying underneath. And I think that a lot of us do that with whatever trauma or whatever life experiences we've been through, whether they are self-inflicted or whether somebody has done something to us. We just kind of bury that that and try to move on with life, but our bodies don't forget trauma. And as a result, we are living this life with a wound that never fully healed. And that's kind of where I was. I was pretending that everything was great and that I was happy and doing well. But unfortunately, when it really came down to it, I was going to counseling on a weekly basis and I despised it. I believe in counseling. I am for counseling. However, at U of I was going to a counselor that the tuition paid for. So it wasn't a Christian counselor. I had just started my relationship and my walk with Christ personally. And so I thought this was a good deal that I could meet with her on a weekly basis. But it was so draining and it was so heavy after each session that I felt like I was bruising the wound every time versus like really unpacking that wound and getting to the source of it and replacing truth with those lies that were buried under the surface. And I can see that all in retrospect. At the time, I was just like, well, I'm doing what I can, Lord. And I just remember crying out to God, and He hears our cries. Like if anybody's listening and you feel like you're in a place of quiet desperation, I want to emphasize that God hears our cries. He hears the cries of our hearts. We don't even have to like say a word, but He loves us as His children and knows the depths of our pain. And He wants to show us His love. And sometimes He does that through another person. And in my case, He did that through another person. And the reason that I had a lot of the trauma and a lot of the weight that I was carrying is because I had been in a situation in high school, actually, where somebody that I had put a lot of trust into, somebody that kind of played the role of protector and very, very close friend for a lot of years, crossed lines that he shouldn't have. And we were drinking. So of course I blamed myself for not being sober and for drinking too much and allowing myself to be in that situation. But at the end of the night, we were back at a resort, and the memories that I have vividly are, first of all, just being physically and emotionally, like hurting physically and emotionally, and asking Him to stop. And by the grace of God, He did. However, I think the pain and the trauma too stems from what happened afterwards. And that was that this was my protector and my best friend that just watched me lay in a bed crying afterwards. Didn't go to comfort me, didn't say he was sorry, and feeling so objectified and feeling so disposable in that moment, that was carried with me. That was something that I didn't forget. So there was the emotional layer, but then there was also the physical layer. And unfortunately, I was having blackouts and flashbacks because of this trauma. When my high school boyfriend would just try to like cuddle with me during a movie, I would pass out and wake up like an hour later and be like, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. So being 20 years old now at college and wondering like, will I ever be able to be married? Will I ever be able to be intimate with my husband? All of those questions were rolling around in my head. But by God's grace, He heard those cries and He guided me from my sorority house across the parking lot into a church that I had been going to pretty consistently, into my little back pew. And instead of the pastor that was normally up front, I was probably 5-10 minutes late, of course. And our pastor invited up a woman by the name of Lindsay. And she shared her story of overcoming sexual assault. And she shared the depths of the pain, but she also shared the power of God's restoration in her life. And she shared that she was now happily married, that all the physical and emotional trauma that was left behind is now gone, that she is healed and whole and fully restored. And that for me changed everything. I went from a place of quiet desperation and hopelessness. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. That's where I was. To, Lord, like you did this in her life. And you love her. She is your precious daughter, and I am your precious daughter. So, of course, you can do the same in my life. But I haven't been leaning into you the way obviously she has. So after the service was over, I ran down, literally thinking that she was like going to, take off, and I just couldn't miss her. But I just said, I would love to get together. And a few days later, we got together at a little diner in Urbana and had a milkshake. And that one interaction and conversation, sitting with her. So it was the story that was important, that restored my hope. But then sitting down and that connection and her telling me that there's power in God's word and that we can renew our minds, that we can speak God's word as a weapon and it can fight those battles and that onset of those blackouts. And she taught me how to do that. And then she also showed me that there were probably some lies in the core of who I was that I was clinging to that needed to be uprooted and replaced with God's truth as well. And between those two things, I, with hand in hand with Jesus, walked forward, and it wasn't overnight, but definitely fully and completely restored. By the time my boyfriend proposed and we were married, and God's just been so gracious. I look at my little girls all the time and think, like, Lord, if it wasn't for your restorative power, like, we would not be here. That's my story. Just the power of being able to meet somebody that God has fully restored is almost a prophecy for me. It was God saying, I can do this for you too.
I liked what you said about desperation, because when you are in that trauma, and thank you so much for being honest and sharing that, because I know that takes a lot of courage to say those things, because sometimes we just get in a place where it's uncomfortable. We have those shame or those lies that you were talking about, those guilts that are like, well, should I be sharing this? There are so many women and men that go through this trauma that the devil just wants to keep us in that desperation. And so through the process of walking across that path to the church just across from your sorority house, I mean, it's just taking those steps of choosing to step out of that and then being able to hear what Lindsay said. You could have just sat in that pew, but something of God connected your stories together.
Yes.
And then it blossomed over a milkshake. I mean, I think we believe that transformation needs to happen in these crazy ways where there's like doves flying and like just these parable moments, but really it is simply somebody saying, hey, I want to take you out and I just want to talk. And it's building that trust and a relationship where you get to experience that restoration. I heard somebody say once, when we have trauma and there is a wound, usually, it gets a little gross sometimes and it needs to heal. And so every time we go back to that trauma, we're like kind of like touching it and it just it festers. I hate that word, but it just becomes so hard in our life and we just don't know how to move forward. So we really need to allow those spaces in our life to heal so that when we touch it, we remember it, but it doesn't hold us back. And that's what Jesus does. And that's what I'm just so grateful that you shared that story about how Jesus can continue to heal us and break those lies over our lives.
Yes. Yeah. If you just go back and touch the wound, that it's painful. One of the things that I've realized is that we put a Band-Aid on this puncture wound, thinking that it will take care of the issue when we really need to get to the bottom of it and remove the shrapnel piece by piece. But if we try to do that on our own, it's just painful. But if we do it with a redeeming God and a God of love, He will show us where He was, even in those traumatic times, even in those painful moments, and then pack that wound with His truth of who His character is, even in those moments. And I Googled actually packing a wound, because this was a visual that was put on my heart as well. And it says that the packing material, which is God's truth, absorbs any drainage of the wound. So that stuff that you're talking about that festers, that absorbs any drainage, which helps the tissue heal from the inside out. But without packing the wound, it might close at the top without healing at the deeper areas of the wound. So you might look fine on the surface, but underneath there's maybe even some deep infection happening that you don't even realize. So
Yeah. And then you have to keep, I think, the idea of just that once something traumatic happens and you feel like you've healed, you're going to have to keep revisiting and just really like checking in, because there's going to be things that trigger that feeling of what you were saying. You just felt like you couldn't trust anyone. Have you had that kind of same thing where as you gone into your marriage and other friendships where trust comes to be a factor and you've had to really like work through that trust, or even your relationship with God?
Yeah. I think that trusting men in general has been difficult because of that hurt, along with a couple others. And then realizing that that's not the heart of the Father, and really digging into his word to know his character and his love. And we see that through Jesus. We know that the heart of the Father was revealed through Jesus. But if I let my own thoughts dominate, then I can't get to the heart of the Father and trust him to be my protector, to be my fortress. So there has been a lot of soul work that has been done there.
It's a constant process of growth, I believe, in every area. And as a parent, it's extremely humbling, because you think, okay, I'm going to teach my kids this, but really I feel like our kids, it's just a reflection of ourselves. You're like, oh, wow, I still also need to work on that as well.
Yes.
So
being a parent, though, has helped me realize the heart of the Father, though, too, that like my kids don't worry about any of their needs. Like they get money from grandma all the time, and they have the dollars, like the singles are just laying around the house everywhere amongst the dolls and, kitchen set, because they don't hang on to things because they don't worry about their needs being met. They know that mommy and daddy are going to take care of their needs. I've had to instill in them that mommy and daddy will protect them and take care of them, but we wouldn't ever, ask them to do anything that would hurt them. And that's the heart of the Father too. He would never ask us or invite us into doing something like a podcast, Danielle,
yes.
That would ever hurt us. But he wants to see us grow, and he wants to see us flourish, just like we want to see our kids flourish. So
you are now married, and what pushed you into starting the Baton Pass? Tell us a little bit more of how you got there and what the Baton Pass is.
It's funny because I, for multiple years, up until just recently, I didn't even remember Lindsay's name. I just remembered her with her story, and that she was the gal with the milkshake that changed everything for me. And when I was probably 25, 26 years old, I read a book called Warrior Chicks by Holly Wagner. And Holly Wagner is a cancer survivor. And so one of the chapters was all about the baton exchange, and how if we have a story that we need to take that baton of hope, or take that baton of endurance and pass it along to the person that's in the valley behind us, that's in the thick of it, because they need that to cling to get to the other side. And that baton is truly what God's done in our life. It's not necessarily just our story, but it's that the God that we serve is also the God that you serve. And if you cling to him, you'll get through this. So that chapter just resonated with me. And that at the first time, I think I realized the impact of that milkshake date. And then things started happening where a friend of mine, unfortunately, her husband had an affair. And I remember sitting there wanting to wrap her up with love and encouragement, but knowing that my story was limited and my encouragement was limited. But I also knew that there were other people in my life that had overcome infidelity within their marriage. And so I did everything in my power to encourage her, but I said, I would love to connect you with somebody that's on the other side of this. If you want to make this work and you want your marriage to be restored, let me connect you with somebody that's done that hard work and that can speak life into that situation. There were other circumstances where one of my best friends, her parent had committed suicide. Again, I love you and I want to encourage you and I will be there by your side, but if I can connect you. And all of a sudden I realized there's power in this. There's power in being seen and known in the whatever you're walking through and connecting with somebody. So we bought the batonpass.com and said, we'll just renew it for the next 10 years. We knew we wanted to have a family and we just wanted to get through the thick of little kids, and God had another plan. And after my first daughter was born, we got pregnant about 2 years later, and 11 weeks in, I had a miscarriage. And And once again, I was in this place of quiet desperation and isolation, but through God's goodness, he sat me next to a friend that I had known fairly well. I had worked out with her at the gym and gone to church with her. Never sat next to her though at church. And the Sunday after, I had to have a D&C. And the Sunday after, she was like, "Where were you? Was it morning sickness? We missed you at the gym this week." And I said, "No, I lost the baby." And she put her arms around me and she said, "Between my two sons, I had a miscarriage too. I'm so sorry. I know this is so hard and I'm just proud of you for being here." But again, if I didn't walk across that parking lot, if I didn't show up at church and just chose to stay in isolation, I wouldn't have had somebody to walk alongside me. And there's so much power in having somebody to walk alongside you. So that was the catalyst where I was just, okay, we can't wait. I don't feel like I'm equipped. I don't feel like I have enough capacity even, but let's just start talking about it and let's just start moving the ball forward. And that was at the beginning of 2017. And towards the end of 2017, I confessed to one of my best friends, Kristen. I said, "Kristen, I think we just need to put a pause on this. I just feel like I'm not enough." And she knows me enough and loves me enough to tell me, "Kelly, no, God is calling you to do this. And if you do this and just are faithful with what he asks you to do, he'll bring around the people, he'll bring around the resources. And then when lives are impacted, instead of you taking the credit, you'll give God the glory because you know that you couldn't have done it on your own." And I love that because that is exactly what happened. That's exactly how it came together. And that's how it is today, almost 4 years later. He brought a Katie Rivera, a really dear friend of mine that had a counseling background, to come alongside me. A friend, Ivy, that was just a prayer warrior, to come alongside me. And then at our third event, my friend Angela was attending and came up to me afterwards and said, "This is what my heart beats for. Whatever I can do, I want to do it." And it's been really cool because she's just using her story and her gifts to empower others right now within the Baton Pass. She's out in Arizona, but we are working together across the country to really make an impact. And I'm excited for just the way God's using her. I didn't have to be enough. God brought like-minded individuals that wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. So we've been hosting events. One of the things that was made clear to me through a mentor is the power of that walk alongside and that connection. So we host events in public places because we want to be able to invite our neighbor and a friend from work or hairdresser or whatever and have them feel comfortable. Because if you're not walking into a church, you're probably not hearing testimonies of God's faithfulness. We have hosted all different types of events, but at every event, the most important piece is that stories are shared and God's glory and goodness is revealed.
Yeah, that's beautiful because I think that when we think about just our culture in general, we put ourselves in it. The goal is just like that game kids used to play. You want to get to the top of the mountain, and I'm going to be here. But really, it's about just like the Baton Pass idea is you're reaching down from that mountain and you are pulling others up along with you and saying, "I want to speak into you," what you said, speaking life and encouraging them because we should be shoulder to shoulder together and supporting each other through very hard situations and also amazing situations. Usually it's easy to go on Instagram or Facebook, whatever social media, and you see all the beautiful things that are happening. But really behind that, that's just a mask. And there's some really challenging things too, that it is hard to share in those times of desperation. So what has been one story that has come out of the women that have come to these meetings that is, wow, I know God is being faithful through this?
That's like my favorite question, Danielle, because that's our fuel. That's what drives us is when we see those divine connections, when we see somebody took that step of faith to share their story and to be vulnerable in this safe and sacred fortress that we've created. But it still takes a lot to share the depths of your pain. The story that sticks out the most is my friend Amy. She shared her story of losing her son Hudson at 8 months old. He was born with some heart issues and never left the hospital. She is such a beautiful soul and such a beautiful spirit. She's been just a gift in my life. And she shared that she thought that was who she was going to be, that it was always going to be that she was the mom of loss and that God was still writing her story. And she has taken what God has done in her life and the restoration and the strength that he has given her and the legacy that she carries on of her son. And she now hosts a wholehearted retreat. And it's for moms of pregnancy loss or child loss. An event that we had at Moretti's. If you're from Chicago, you know Moretti's. She shared her story, and a woman that came to a Baton Pass event for the very first time was sitting there and had also lost a child. And she was just invited by a friend. She didn't know what to expect. I think 90% of people that come to a Baton Pass event, they're like, I don't get the name. Like, are there people going to be twirling like batons of fire? Like, what's going to happen when I get there? But usually a friend's just like, come, it's going to be so good. I've been to one before, just come. So this woman had no idea what to expect. And she didn't know that Amy's story would sound a lot like hers, but with a little bit different ending of hope and restoration. Because of that connection, she heard about the retreat and she had never connected with other moms about her loss. And she was hesitant that, do I go on this retreat? And because of the generosity of the community, our Baton Pass community, somebody else donated a specific amount that God had put on their heart a week prior. And it was the exact amount for this woman to go on her retreat.
It's amazing.
And so just seeing all of this come together. And then for Amy, like our leadership team was all praying for this woman, this mother, going on this retreat and all the details. And they had some car time even, and then the time at the retreat. And Amy was giving us updates along the way. And we're all like sobbing here back in Chicago. The retreat happened in North Carolina. And we hosted an event in Chicago. And God in his beauty brought this woman out of isolation into like the beauty of North Carolina to be with other mamas, to mourn her child, but also to be seen and loved and known in that. And that we could all be here praying for her, but she could be loved and seen and known and be able to go through the grieving process in order to honor her child even more and moving on with her life. That's just one of my stories, but those are my favorite. There's stories of women sharing being on the verge of suicide at an event and that changing the trajectory for another friend of mine that was praying that she wouldn't wake up in the morning. And it doesn't have to be the exact same story either. My aunt actually shared her story of overcoming multiple miscarriages and stillborns and then adopting a beautiful baby girl and having a son at our first event. And another friend, Cindy, had come that I didn't even know just started cancer treatment. And Cindy, she heard my Aunt Geraldine's story. And Cindy said, if she can go through that, I can go through this cancer treatment. And Cindy is, living a full and healthy life today. But it's just like we can borrow each other's hope and we can borrow each other's strength and say, okay, God walked her through that. God will be with me through this.
I like what you said about borrowed hope, because sometimes in our life, we're the ones that need that borrowed hope. And then at other times, we are able to share that with others, because sometimes the prayers, like we can't even speak, but we have these people around us that God has provided with us that can be that borrowed hope to us. Also, you talked about pieces, and I think that's so important because sometimes when I hear somebody's story, I think, okay, well, I maybe have not had a traumatic situation in my life. So I've really thought sometimes, like, is there something that's going to happen? Should I be waiting for something? Is my story enough? What you were just thinking? And really, it's just a piece, or just understanding all of our pain is going to be different. All of our joys are going to be different, but it's the faithfulness of God that we can see throughout everything and that we are connected in that way. So thank you so much for sharing about your ministry and the Baton Pass. If people are interested in getting connected to you or your ministry, how can they do that?
We would love to bring more in to our community. The best way to connect with me personally is just emailing me at thebatonpass@gmail.com. So it's just the BATONPASS@gmail.com. Our Instagram account is the same. So we'd love for you to stay in touch with us via Instagram. And then if you're interested, we do have a closed women's group that we dive a little bit deeper and have discussions. And after events, the women that speak at our events often are facilitating conversation within that women's group. It is closed because we want to protect that sacred fortress that we're creating in that safe space. So if you are interested, just let me know that you heard about the Baton Pass on the Parable podcast, and we'll accept you and bring you into our community there. And right now, if you're listening outside of the Chicagoland area and interested in maybe hosting some events in your own city, I would love to connect with you as well. We will be launching our second chapter in Phoenix. I am heading out there in December to help them gear up and get ready so that they are armed and deployed and ready to go. If you are in another city and you just feel like you have a handful of ladies or yourself that would be interested, I would love to connect with you. I see this being across the country and all different groups of women gathering and inviting others into this space so that they can hear that God is faithful, and whatever you're facing, He will walk you through.
Thank you so much for being what you just said, faithful, and just willing to take the next step in however God is leading you, and sharing so many stories in your parable to help others and connect with Him. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I can't wait to hear more of your podcast, and it's been such an honor getting to know you, just the little snippet that I've gotten. So thank you, Danielle, for who you are and your faithfulness.
You know, it was so beautiful to hear about the transformation that began in Kelly's life over a milkshake, right? Sometimes we believe the lie in order to share. Maybe we're not good enough. We have, that shame or guilt in our past. We don't know enough about the Bible, or we just believe all these lies. But when in reality, we are enough right where we are. God is using us, and it is just so good to just have that freedom to share. If you want to dig in a little deeper around this topic, every week we have some takeaway questions to think about and maybe journal about, or have a conversation with a friend you trust. Number 1, why have you allowed a wound in your past to not fully heal? What is one way you can allow healing to take place? Number 2, do you love yourself? I think a lot of us can struggle with I'm not enough mindset. I think in order for us to love the people that are in our lives, in our community, our friends and family, we need to love ourselves first. So if you want to figure out, is that the case for you? Go ahead and write that down. I'll also link one of my messages that I've done in the past that kind of surrounds that topic as well, if you would like to listen to that in the show notes. Number 3, who has been someone that has passed you a baton? Kelly kind of talked about how we get to uplift and encourage others in our life, and we've all been the recipients of that baton. So who can you thank today? Encourage them and let them know that they were so special in this season or moment of your life. So thank you so much for listening. Just a heads up, the Baton Pass has an event on Saturday, October 9th. Aubrey Sampson, she is an author. She's going to be sharing her story. This is happening in person. It's in the Chicagoland area. Otherwise, you can join online from anywhere. All the details will be in today's show notes. And in case you can't make it, you can always keep in touch with them at thebatonpass.com. If you like the show, I would so appreciate it if you shared this with a friend. It's a great way to connect and continue this conversation. Plus, you can also subscribe or follow wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have any questions or you want more information, you can find the show notes today at daniellezapchenk.com. Thank you for listening today. Remember, your parable showcases the transformation of God in your life. And I can't wait to have another conversation with you again next week on the Parable Podcast.